Formalizing Phenomenology, the universal principle of collapse as a structural foundation for meaning, recognition, and the observer. Eloy Escogido Gutierrez, Independent Scholar, March 29, 2026. Abstract. This paper presents the universal principle of collapse, UPC, a structural framework that describes how potential becomes a definite event across domains. Phenomenology and quantum mechanics both rely on an observer who recognizes an outcome, yet neither field has possessed a shared formal method for how recognition occurs. UPC provides that method through a simple operator chain P O rightward arrow M O rightward arrow S rightward arrow L O rightward arrow J rightward arrow C rightward arrow T that makes explicit the steps by which meaning or measurement becomes definite. Using plain language and direct examples, the paper shows that phenomenological meaning formation and quantum measurement share the same structural sequence. Phenomenology describes potential experience, intentionality, attention, recognition, meaning, and retention. Quantum mechanics describes superposition, measurement models, Born weights, detector articulation, outcome selection, and classical records. UPC reveals these as structurally identical processes indexed to an observer. Collapse is not a physical event in matter but the moment an observer uniquely recognizes an outcome. By restoring the observer to the center of the collapse process, UPC corrects the category error that arises when meaning is treated as material. This correction stabilizes interpretation in scientific practice, prevents misattribution in AI systems, and clarifies how institutions generate and maintain meaning. The framework provides phenomenology with a reproducible method, gives quantum mechanics a transparent account of the observer it implicitly relies on, and grounds human value in the structure of recognition. All formal operator definitions, cross-domain mappings, and worked examples, including linguistic, perceptual, social, musical, and quantum cases, are provided in Appendices A, H. Reader Orientation Note, Compact Version. The UPC framework is structural rather than metaphysical. Readers may initially approach it with assumptions drawn from physics, phenomenology, linguistics, or cognitive science, which can obscure the operator-level distinctions the framework makes explicit, especially the separation between mechanical registration and meaning collapse, the observer-indexed nature of articulation, and the domain-independent structure of the operator chain. The paper is best read through this structural lens. Section 1.3 provides the conceptual grounding for this shift. Introduction. Phenomenology studies how meaning appears to an observer. Quantum mechanics describes how physical outcomes appear to an observer. Both domains rely on the same missing structure, the observer who recognizes an outcome. The universal principle of collapse, UPC, formalizes this structure. It provides a simple operator chain, PO, MO, S, LO, JO, C, T, that describes how potential becomes a definite, recognized event. Quantum mechanics uses this structure implicitly in its measurement postulate. Phenomenology uses it implicitly in its analysis of experience. Neither domain has previously had a shared formal method. This paper presents that method. The goal is clarity. Every concept is explained in plain language. Every step is shown directly. The operator chain is used as the backbone of explanation. No specialized vocabulary is required beyond the operators themselves. A young reader can follow the structure. A specialist can verify the rigor. A complete formal definition of the UPC operators and their mathematical structure is provided in Appendix A, which also includes the structural summary of the observer, model variability, mechanical registration, consensus, and operator magnification. Domain-specific mappings and worked examples are collected in Appendices C, F, allowing the reader to navigate the paper as a layer-ed map of the UPC architecture. The result is a bridge. UPC shows that phenomenology is not soft, subjective, or secondary. It operates at the same structural level as quantum measurement. Meaning, recognition, and the observer can now be described with the same precision used in physics. Observer principle. UPC distinguishes clearly between observers and physical devices. Detectors, instruments, and computational systems generate mechanical registrations, but they do not perform collapse. Collapse occurs only when a meaning-bearing agent recognizes an outcome as this rather than that. This principle prevents the common category error of treating physical systems as observers and ensures that the same structural logic applies across physics, perception, language, and interpretation. The observer is not an added metaphysical entity, it is the structural point at which potential becomes definite. This paper itself illustrates the principle. The text is a trace left by a meaning-bearing agent, the author, and it remains potential until the reader collapses it into meaning. This paper provides phenomenology with a formal tool set. It restores the observer to its proper structural role. It supports human value by giving meaning a clear, operational method. 1. The operator chain explained in plain language. The universal principle of collapse, UPC, describes how something that could happen becomes something that did happen. It does this through a simple sequence of steps called the operator chain. PO rightward arrow MO rightward arrow S rightward arrow LO rightward arrow JO rightward arrow C rightward arrow T. Each step is small. Each step is clear. Together they describe how meaning appears to an observer. Below is the chain in plain language. 1.1 PO potential. PO is the field of possibilities. It is everything that could be noticed, interpreted, or understood. A child sees a room full of toys. A physicist sees a system in a superposition. Both are looking at a field of potential. PO is not meaning. It is the starting point. 1.2 MO. Model. MO is the model the observer uses to make sense of the potential. A child knows what a ball is. A physicist knows what a detector is. Both are using a model. The model shapes what can be recognized. 1.3 Salience/weighting orientation. This section provides the structural lens required for interpreting the UPC operator chain. The distinctions introduced here, especially the role and placement of salience, frame the logic of the entire paper and should be kept in mind as later sections are read. S assigns weights to the distinctions defined by the model. It determines which possibilities stand out as more likely or more meaningful. A child is more drawn to bright colors. A physicist expects certain detector outcomes to be more probable. Both experience weighted possibilities. S is not yet selection. It is prioritization. Metanote. The placement of the salient E operator, S, in any UPC operator chain depends on the fractional scope of the model being constructed. In the general, domain-independent formulation presented in this paper, salience interacts with multiple operator layers, PO, MO, LO, and JO, and its position is determined by the modeler S representational commitments rather than by a universal ordering. Specific UPC applications, such as domain-bounded meaning events, may assign S a fixed local position for clarity, but this reflects the scope of the model rather than a structural constraint of UPC itself. Extended metanote on salience dynamics. While this manuscript treats the salience operator S as a local weighting applied to articulated distinctions, LO, the broader UPC framework allows for a more dynamic interpretation. In many real-world meaning events, salience is not a single, static evaluation but a fractional, continuously updating field that can re-enter the collapse chain at multiple points. As observers articulate distinctions, revise their models, or shift attention, the salience landscape itself may change, producing recursive loops in which S modulates PO, MO, LO, and even JO before E commitment, C, is reached. Importantly, the selection of which aspects of a situation to model is itself a collapse event, meaning that salience can operate both within and prior to the model chain. This flexibility does not undermine the operator sequence, rather, it reflects the fact that each UPC model is a slice of a potentially unbounded recursive process. The placement of S in this paper therefore reflects the bounded scope of the event under analysis, while leaving open the more general recursive formulation developed in the broader UPC literature. Meta-note on salience and the Born rule. Within the UPC, QM bridge, the Born rule appears as the quantum mechanical instantiation of the salience operator S. This correspondence should not be interpreted as implying that the Born rule represents a physical collapse mechanism. Instead, in the UPC framework, the Born weighting is understood as the structural salience profile over a quantum potential domain. This reframing dissolves the traditional interpretive puzzle surrounding the Born rule by treating it as a special case of a more general salience architecture rather than a dynamical process in space-time. Because salience determines which distinctions, bases, or models become operative, the act of selecting a measurement basis or modeling frame is itself a collapse event. Thus, even before a UPC chain is formally specified, a recursive salience process has already shaped the observer's representational commitments. Different UPC models therefore represent bounded slices of a potentially unbounded recursive process in which salience modulates PO, MO, LO, and JO at multiple levels. The present manuscript adopts a fixed placement of S appropriate to the specific phenomenon analyzed, while leaving open the more general recursive formulation for future work. 1.4 LO Logical ordering. LO is the ordering of attention. It is the way the observer sorts the potential into something manageable. A child looks at the red ball first. A physicist looks at the detector reading. Both are selecting what matters. LO is not yet recognition. It is preparation. 1.5 JO Recognition. JO is the moment of recognition. It is when the observer identifies something as this and not that. A child says, "That is my ball." A physicist says, "The detector clicked." Both are performing recognition. JO is the key step. It is the point where meaning becomes possible. 1.6 C Collapse. C is the collapse into a definite meaning. It is when the observer commits to one interpretation. A child decides the ball is red. A physicist records the measurement outcome. Both are selecting a single result from many possibilities. Collapse is not physical. Collapse is recognition made definite. 1.7 T Trace. T is the trace left behind. It is the memory, record, or stabilization of the meaning. A child remembers the ball. A physicist writes the result in a log. Both create a trace. The trace allows meaning to persist. 1.8 Why this chain matters. This chain is simple enough for anyone to understand. It is also precise enough to match the structure of quantum measurement. Quantum mechanics uses this chain implicitly. Phenomenology uses it implicitly. UPC makes it explicit. This is the bridge. The full mathematical definition of each operator in this chain, along with its domain general formalization, is provided in Appendix A. Note on chain magnification and condensed forms. UPC is a scalable structural framework. The operator chain can be expressed at different levels of magnification depending on the domain. Full chain, canonical PO rightward arrow MO rightward arrow S rightward arrow LO rightward arrow JO rightward arrow C rightward arrow T used for cross-domain analysis and quantum alignment. Condensed chain, logical projection J rightward arrow A rightward arrow C rightward arrow L rightward arrow are used in earlier UPC work on music, narrative, and phenomenology. These condensed forms are not different theories. They are logical projections of the full chain. Expanded chain, domain-specific J, A, S, JO, C, L, are used in the UPC, QM bridge to match the structure of the measurement postulate. These chains are not different theories. They are different resolutions of the same structural architecture. The full chain is canonical, the others are projections or expansions used when appropriate. Human meaning isn't flat. It has depth, like looking at the ocean. You can take in the whole surface at once, or you can zoom into the layers, the scent of the salt, the motion of the waves, the life moving underneath, the feeling it gives you, the memory it stirs, the contrast with a moment that came before. All of these are the same ocean, just seen at different magnifications. Meaning works the same way. Depending on the person and the task, an observer can choose which layer to work at and how deeply to zoom in. UPC doesn't force a single resolution, it gives a structure that stays consistent no matter how close or far you look. Note on operator magnification: UPC is a scalable structural framework. Each operator in the canonical chain, PO rightward arrow, MO rightward arrow, S rightward arrow, LO rightward arrow, JO rightward arrow, C rightward arrow, T can be expanded into finer grained sub-operations when the domain requires it. This magnification principle is why earlier UPC papers used shorter or longer chains depending on the resolution of analysis. LO may include micro-articulation, perceptual grouping, and temporal sequencing. JO may include feature binding, disambiguation, and category activation. C may include commitment, exclusion of alternatives, and stabilization. T may include memory encoding, habit formation, and social reinforcement. Meaning is layered and complex. UPC provides the structural backbone, and the chain expands naturally to match the resolution of analysis. 2. Mapping phenomenology to the operator chain. Phenomenology studies how meaning appears to an observer. UPC describes how meaning appears to an observer. The structures match directly. Below is the mapping, step by step, using the same operator chain introduced earlier. 2.1 PO rightward arrow. The phenomenological field, Lebenswelt. Phenomenology begins with the life world, the field of experience before interpretation. This is PO. It is the total set of what could be noticed. It is not yet meaning. It is the raw potential of experience. Phenomenology calls it the given. UPC calls it PO. The structure is the same. 2.2 MO rightward arrow. Intentionality, the observer's model. Phenomenology holds that consciousness is always about something. This aboutness is intentionality. It is the model the observer brings to the field. This is MO. The observer's model determines what can be recognized. It shapes the horizon of possible meaning. Phenomenology calls it intentional structure. UPC calls it MO. The structure is the same. 2.3 S rightward arrow. Salience, weighting of experience. Phenomenology acknowledges that some possibilities stand out more than others. This weighting is not yet attention, but the pre-attentive salience that shapes what is likely to appear. This is S. The observer's background, expectations, and bodily orientation give different possibilities different weights. Phenomenology calls this effective or anticipatory salience. UPC calls its. The structure is the same. In this paper, S is presented in its local, event-level role. Its exact placement in the operator chain depends on the scope and commitments of the model being constructed. For the general recursive formulation of salience and its role in model selection, see section 1.3. 2.4 LO rightward arrow. Attention, the ordering of experience. Phenomenology describes attention as the act of selecting what stands out. This is LO. Attention orders the field. It determines what becomes foreground and what becomes background. Phenomenology calls this the structure of appearance. UPC calls it LO. The structure is the same. 2.5 JO rightward arrow. Identification, the moment of recognition. Phenomenology describes the moment when something becomes this rather than that. This is the recognition event. This is JO. It is the point where the observer identifies an object, meaning, or significance. It is the turning point between possibility and meaning. Phenomenology calls it the act of identification. UPC calls it JO. The structure is the same. 2.6 C rightward arrow. Meaning, collapse into a definite interpretation. Phenomenology describes how meaning becomes definite. This is the collapse into a single interpretation. This is C. The observer commits to one meaning among many possible meanings. The ambiguity ends. The meaning stabilizes. Phenomenology calls this the constitution of meaning. UPC calls it C. The structure is the same. 2.7 T rightward arrow. Retention, The trace of experience, phenomenology describes retention, the trace left in memory, understanding, or habit. This is T. The trace stabilizes meaning across time. It allows the observer to recognize similar events in the future. Phenomenology calls this retention or sedimentation. UPC calls it T. The structure is the same. 2.8 The mapping is direct and complete. Phenomenology has always described the field of experience, the observer's model, the ordering of attention, the moment of recognition, the constitution of meaning, the retention of meaning. UPC formalizes these steps with operators. Quantum mechanics uses the same structure for measurement. Phenomenology uses it for meaning. The bridge is not metaphorical. It is structural. A full operator-level mapping of these phenomenological structures, including formal definitions and worked examples, is provided in Appendix C3. Method: how to apply UPC in phenomenological analysis. Phenomenology has always described how meaning appears to an observer. UPC provides a formal sequence for how meaning appears. This section gives a clear, repeatable method for applying the UPC operator chain to any phenomenological event. The method has 6 steps. Each step corresponds to one operator. Each step is simple and direct. Step 1: Identify PO, the field of potential experience, describe everything that could be noticed before interpretation. This is the phenomenological field. Examples: the room, the sounds, the objects, the possibilities of attention. This step lists the potential without assigning meaning. Step 2: Identify MO, the observer's model, describe the model the observer brings to the field. This includes expectations, concepts, habits, and prior understanding. Examples: knowing what a chair is, expecting a sound to come from a door, recognizing a friend's voice. The step identifies the structure that makes recognition possible. Step 3: Identify salience/weighting, describe which possibilities stand out before attention is directed. This is the pre-attentive weighting of the field. Examples: bright colors feel more noticeable, familiar voices feel more likely, expected events feel more probable. This step shows how the observer's background and expectations weight the potential. This is the local form of S, its broader structure E varies with model scope. This step presents the local, event-level form of salience, for the broader recursive structure E, see section 1.3. Step 4: Identify LO, the ordering of attention, describe what the observer attends to first, second, and so on. This is the ordering of the field. Examples: looking at the red object before the blue one, hearing the loud sound before the quiet one, noticing movement before stillness. This step shows how the observer organizes the potential. Step 5: Identify JO, the moment of recognition, describe the exact moment when the observer identifies something as this and not that. Examples: that is my friend. That sound is the door opening. That object is a chair. This step marks the transition from possibility to identification. Step 6: Identify C, the collapse into meaning, describe the moment when the observer commits to a single interpretation. Examples: deciding the sound was the door, deciding the object is a chair, deciding the person is familiar. This step is the formation of definite meaning. Step 7: Identify T, the trace that stabilizes the meaning, describe the trace left behind, memory, understanding, or record. Examples: remembering the event, updating expectations, forming a habit, writing a note. This step shows how meaning persists over time. 3.1 The method is mechanical. This method does not interpret. It does not speculate. It does not rely on metaphor. It identifies the structural steps that occur in every phenomenological event. The method can be applied to perception, emotion, decision, social meaning, language, value, identity, scientific observation. It is general because the structure is general. 3.2 Why this method works. Phenomenology has always described the field, the model, attention, recognition, meaning, retention. UPC provides the operators that formalize these steps. Quantum mechanics uses the same structure for measurement. Phenomenology uses it for meaning. The method is the bridge. Formal operator-level demonstrations of this method, including linguistic, perceptual, and social worked examples, are provided in Appendix C4. Demonstration: a simple example. This section applies the UPC operator chain to an everyday phenomenological event. The example is intentionally simple. A young reader can follow it. A specialist can verify the structure. The event: a child sees a red ball on the floor. We apply the method step by step. 4.1 PO The field of potential experience. The child enters the room. There are many things that could be noticed: the floor, the toys, the colors, the shapes, the sounds. This is PO. It is the field of potential experience. Nothing has meaning yet. 4.2 MO The observer's model. The child has a model. They know what a ball is, they know what red is, they know toys belong to them or others. This model shapes what can be recognized. This is MO. 4.3 LO The ordering of attention. The child looks around. Their attention moves, first to the bright color, then to the round shape, then to the object on the floor. This ordering selects what matters. This is LO. This ordering follows the salience weighting, S, that makes some possibilities stand out more than others. The recursive interaction between LO and salience is discussed in section 1.3. 4.4 JO The moment of recognition. The child identifies the object, that is my red ball. This is the recognition event. It is the moment when the object becomes this and not that. This is JO. 4.5 C Collapse into meaning. The child commits to the meaning: it is a ball, it is red, it is theirs. The ambiguity ends. The meaning becomes definite. This is C. 4.6 T The trace. The child remembers the ball. They may pick it up. They may play with it. They may store the memory for later. This is T. It stabilizes the meaning across time. 4.7 The same structure in quantum measurement. Now we show the parallel. The structure is identical. A detector measures a quantum system. PO, the system is in a superposition. MO, the detector is configured with a model of possible outcomes. S, the Born weights assign probabilities to each outcome. LO, the detector articulates the incoming signal according to that model. JO, the detector registers a specific click. C, the outcome becomes definite within the measurement apparatus. T, the result is recorded in a log or data file in every step. The scientist is the observer who sets the model, inter pares the detector, and gives the outcome its meaning. Quantum mechanics uses the observer throughout the experiment while keeping the observer hidden in the formalism. 4.8 Why this demonstration matters. This example shows three things clearly. 1. Phenomenology follows the operator chain. Meaning appears through PO rightward arrow, MO rightward arrow, S rightward arrow, LO rightward arrow, JO rightward arrow, C rightward arrow, T. 2. Quantum measurement follows the same chain. The measurement postulate is the same structure. 3. UPC makes the structure E explicit. It gives phenomenology a formal method and gives quantum mechanics a clear observer model. The bridge is not theoretical. It is operational. A fully formal operator-level demonstration of these same steps, including the qubit measurement example and cross-domain mappings, is provided in Appendix D5. Implications: what phenomenology gains from UPC? Phenomenology has always described how meaning appears to an observer. It has never had a formal method for how meaning becomes definite. UPC supplies that method. The implications are direct. 5.1 Phenomenology gains a formal structure for meaning formation. Phenomenology describes the field of experience, intentionality, salience / what stands out, pre-attentively, attention, identification, meaning, retention. UPC provides the operator chain that formalizes these steps: PO rightward arrow, MO rightward arrow, S rightward arrow, LO rightward arrow, JO rightward arrow, C rightward arrow, T. This gives phenomenology a structural backbone. It replaces descriptive sequences with operator-level precision. Short note: as clarified in section 1.3, salience may operate recursively across multiple operator layers depending on model scope. 5.2 Phenomenology gains a clear account of the observer. Phenomenology has always centered the observer. Quantum mechanics has always used the observer while hiding the observer. UPC makes the observer explicit in both domains. This restores the observer to its proper structural role. It removes the category error that occurs when meaning is treated as material. 5.3 Phenomenology gains a method that can be reproduced. UPC turns phenomenological analysis into a repeatable procedure. Any phenomenological event can be analyzed using the same 6 steps. This eliminates ambiguity and interpretive drift. A method that can be repeated is a method that can be verified. 5.4 Phenomenology gains parity with scientific formalism. Phenomenology has been historically downgraded for lacking mathematical structure. UPC provides that structure. The operator chain is compatible with quantum measurement, information theory, cognitive science, AI, interpretability, decision theory. Phenomenology now operates at the same structural level as these fields. 5.5 Phenomenology gains a bridge to quantum mechanics. The structure of meaning formation is the same as the structure of measurement. This is not analogy. It is identity of form. Phenomenology and quantum mechanics share potential model ordering, recognition, collapse, trace. UPC makes this explicit. The bridge is complete. 5.6 Phenomenology gains protection against reductionism. When meaning is treated as material, the observer is erased. This produces paradoxes, distortions, and instability in human value. UPC prevents this. It shows that meaning requires an observer. It shows that collapse is recognition, not physics. It shows that human value is structurally grounded. Phenomenology gains a formal defense against reductionism. 5.7 Phenomenology gains a tool for human well-being. Meaning is not optional. It is the structure by which humans navigate the world. UPC provides a clear method for stabilizing meaning, identifying distortions, correcting collapse errors, supporting agency, protecting value. Phenomenology gains a tool that directly supports human well-being. The formal structure is underlying these implications, including operator definitions, consensus dynamics, and cross-domain mappings, are presented in appendices A, F. 6. The observer restored, correcting the hidden structure in QM and philosophy. Both quantum mechanics and modern philosophy rely on the observer. Both have built entire systems that use the observer while hiding the observer. UPC makes this structure explicit and corrects the error. The correction is simple: meaning and measurement require an observer. When the observer is removed, the structure collapses incorrectly. Metanote. Confusions about collapse typically arise from conflating mechanical registration with meaning collapse, or from treating observer-indexed structures as global physical events. These are cognitive sociological effects, not structural features of the measurement chain. The formalism introduced here distinguishes these layers without altering physics or adding new assumptions. 6.1 The observer is present in every step of quantum measurement. Quantum mechanics describes measurement as if it were a physical event. It is not. It is an interpretive event. The scientist sets the model, configures the detector, defines the possible outcomes, interprets the signal, records the result, assigns meaning to the data. The salience step, S, corresponds to the Born weights that structure the detector's possible outcomes before any signal is articulated. The observer is present in every step of the operator chain: P O rightward arrow, M O rightward arrow, S rightward arrow, L O rightward arrow, J rightward arrow, C rightward arrow, T. Quantum mechanics uses the observer throughout the experiment. It hides the observer in the formalism. UPC restores the observer to the structure. Here S is shown in its quantum measurement role. In broader UPC models, its placement reflects the scope and structure of the observer's model rather than a universal ordering. For the general treatment of salience and its relation to the Born rule, see section 1.3. 6.2 Philosophy has repeated the same error. Materialist and reductionist frameworks treat meaning as if it were physical. This removes the observer from the structure. The result is paradox. Examples: consciousness treated as a byproduct of matter, meaning treated as neural activity, value treated as preference, interpretation treated as computation. These positions collapse meaning into material description. They erase the observer. They produce contradictions. UPC corrects this by showing meaning is collapse indexed to an observer. Without the observer, meaning cannot form. 6.3 Phenomenology has always known the observer is central. Phenomenology begins with the observer. It describes intentionality, attention, salience / what stands out, pre-attentively, recognition, meaning, retention, but it has lacked a formal structure for these steps. This has allowed critics to dismiss phenomenology as subjective or soft. UPC provides the missing structure. It shows that phenomenology's descriptions match the operator chain exactly. The observer is not optional. The observer is structural. 6.4 The category error, treating meaning as material. The core error in both physics and philosophy is the same, treating meaning as if it were a physical property. This produces paradoxes in quantum mechanics, contradictions in philosophy of mind, instability in theories of value, confusion in AI interpretation, distortions in social and institutional systems. UPC resolves the error by distinguishing physical events, material, meaning events, collapse indexed to an observer. The two are not the same. They cannot be substituted. They cannot be reduced to one another. 6.5 Restoring the observer stabilizes meaning. When the observer is restored to the structure, meaning becomes clear, measurement becomes coherent, paradoxes dissolve, value becomes grounded, interpretation becomes methodical, phenomenology gains formal rigor. The operator chain provides the mechanism. The observer provides the index. Meaning becomes structurally stable. 6.6 The correction is simple and complete. UPC does not add new metaphysics. It does not modify physics. It does not reinterpret phenomenology. It reveals the structure both domains already use: P O rightward arrow, M O rightward arrow, S rightward arrow, L O rightward arrow, J rightward arrow, C rightward arrow, T. The observer is present in every step. The observer is required for every step. The observer is the structural center. Restoring the observer corrects the hidden structure in both quantum mechanics and philosophy. The formal operator level treatment of the observer, including its role in quantum measurement, phenomenology, and expressive domains, is presented in appendices A, F. 6.7 Consequences for human value and meaning. Restoring the observer to the structure has direct consequences for human value. When meaning is treated as material, the observer is erased, and human value becomes unstable. When the observer is recognized as the index of collapse, meaning becomes structurally grounded. UPC shows that value is not a byproduct of matter but a result of recognition, interpretation, and commitment by an observer. This stabilizes meaning across personal, social, and institutional domains. It provides a clear method for identifying distortions, preventing collapse errors, and protecting the conditions under which human value can be formed and maintained. By restoring the observer, UPC restores the structural basis for meaning, agency, and dignity. 6.8 Consequences for scientific practice, AI systems, and institutions. Restoring the observer to the structure has immediate consequences for how science, AI, and institutions operate. Each of these domains currently treats meaning as if it were material. Each relies on the observer while hiding the observer. UPC corrects this by making the observer explicit in every collapse event. The consequences are direct. 6.8.1 Scientific practice. Scientific measurement depends on interpretation. The scientist sets the model, configures the apparatus, defines the outcomes, and assigns meaning to the results. UPC makes the structure explicit. It shows that measurement is not a purely physical event but a recognition event indexed to an observer. This eliminates the hidden assumption that data speaks for itself. It clarifies that meaning arises through P O rightward arrow, M O rightward arrow, S rightward arrow, L O rightward arrow, J rightward arrow, C rightward arrow, T, not through matter alone. Scientific practice gains transparency and structural coherence. 6.8.2 AI systems. AI systems process signals but do not perform recognition in the phenomenological sense. They register patterns but do not collapse meaning. UPC makes this distinction clear. It prevents the category error of treating machine output as equivalent to human interpretation. It provides a method for identifying where meaning is assigned by humans and where machines are only transforming data. This stabilizes expectations, prevents misattribution, and protects human agency in systems that rely on automated processing. 6.8.3 Social and institutional systems. Institutions often treat meaning as if it were objective and independent of observers. This produces distortions when policies, metrics, or classifications are treated as material facts rather than interpretive collapses. UPC shows that institutional meaning is also indexed to observers and follows the same operator chain. This allows institutions to identify collapse errors, correct interpretive distortions, and stabilize meaning across groups. It provides a structural basis for transparency, accountability, and value protection. 6.8.4 Unified implication across science, AI, and institutions. The same correction applies. Meaning is not material, meaning is collapse indexed to an observer. Recognizing this prevents structural errors, stabilizes interpretation, and protects the conditions under which human value can be formed and maintained. 7. Conclusion. This paper has shown that phenomenology and quantum mechanics share the same structural sequence for how potential becomes a definite event. The universal principle of collapse, UPC, makes this sequence explicit through the operator chain P O rightward arrow M O rightward arrow S rightward arrow L O rightward arrow J rightward arrow C rightward arrow T. Phenomenology has always described these steps in terms of experience, intentionality, attention, recognition, meaning, and retention. Quantum mechanics has always relied on these steps in measurement while keeping the observer hidden in the formalism. UPC reveals the common structure and provides a formal method that applies to both domains. By restoring the observer to the center of the collapse process, UPC corrects the category error of treating meaning as material. It shows that collapse is recognition indexed to an observer, not a physical event in matter. This correction stabilizes the formation of meaning, clarifies the role of interpretation in scientific practice, prevents misattribution in AI systems, and provides institutions with a method for identifying and correcting collapse errors. Phenomenology gains a formal structure, a reproducible method, and parity with scientific frameworks. Quantum mechanics gains a clear account of the observer it has always used. Human value gains a stable foundation grounded in the structure of recognition. The bridge is complete. All formal definitions, operator mappings, and cross-domain worked examples referenced in this conclusion are collected in Appendices A, H. Appendix A. Unified UPC operator definitions. A complete, domain general formalization. This appendix consolidates all operator definitions from the UPC corpus into a single, unified formal system. These operators apply across quantum measurement, linguistic interpretation, perceptual ambiguity, social cognition, and musical expression. A.0 Observer. O. An observer is a meaning-bearing agent, a system capable of applying a model to potential and articulating an outcome. Formally, an observer is any system that instantiates the full recognition, collapse, trace, repotentialization cycle, J rightward arrow C rightward arrow T rightward arrow R. This definition is structural, not psychological. It does not depend on biology, introspection, or self-awareness. It depends only on the capacity to interpret information within a model, MO, and to articulate a unique outcome, J rightward arrow C. An observer is the entity for whom potential becomes articulated reality. Mechanical systems are not observers. Detectors, sensors, automata, and physical measuring devices perform mechanical registration but do not apply models, do not articulate outcomes, and do not perform collapse. Attempts to replace observers with mechanical devices do not eliminate collapse, they merely defer it. Treating mechanical registration as collapse hides the observer and generates the paradoxes of quantum mechanics. UPC does not treat meaning-bearing agency as emergent from mechanical complexity. If a system instantiates the observer architecture, it is because it is already a meaning-bearing agent, not because mechanical processes have produced meaning. UPC allows that meaning-bearing agents may differ in their models and may adopt paradoxes according to those models, but it does not assume that mechanical systems can become observers. Every act of interpretation, including reading this paper, exemplifies the structure E, the author leaves a trace, and the reader collapses it into meaning. A.1 Potential domain, PO, a non-empty set of potential outcomes available to an observer prior to articulation, PO equals P1, P2, Pn undifferentiated. Non-articulated not yet indexed to any observer structurally analogous to the quantum states IA.2 model, MO, a partition of the potential domain, MO equals C1, C2, CK with CI subset symbol POCI mathematical intersection symbol CJ equals ICI equals POMO defines the outcome classes available to an observer. In QM, measurement basis /POVM. In phenomenology, linguistic, perceptual, social, or musical models. A.3 Recognition, JO, the observer's unique selection of one outcome class, JO, MO rightward arrow CI with the uniqueness condition. CI set membership symbol MO such that JO equals CI recognition is the structural moment of this one. Clarifying JO and C are adjacent but distinct operations. JO, recognition, is the selection event. The observer identifies one candidate outcome class as the recognized structure. C, collapse, is the stabilization event. The observer excludes alternatives and commits to the selected outcome. Formally, JO performs the selection. C enforces exclusivity across the model MOA.4 articulation operator, LO/A__expressive, maps potential to model defined classes, LO, PO rightward arrow MO in expressive domains, A_expressive, M equals E_O articulation prepares a meaning for expression. LO as an ordered function. LO is not an independent operator. It is derived from the model and its salience weights, LO equals order, MOS. The observer orders the field according to the distinctions defined by MO and the weights assigned by S. This makes explicit the dependency already present in the structure. The earlier UPC papers used a lower resolution view of the same structure E. The condensed chain is simply the zoomed out version of the full chain presented here. For the recursive formulation of salience and its influence on LO, see section 1.3. A.5 Strength function S, JMOPO, assigns weights to outcome classes, S, MO rightward arrow 0, 1, sigma IS, CI, equals 1 in QM, Born rule in phenomenology, salience, plausibility, perceptual weight. Here LO and S are shown in their event level roles. In broader UPC models, their interaction and placement depend on the scope and structure E of the observer S model. For the broader recursive interpretation of S and its quantum instantiation via the Born rule, see section 1.3. A.5.1 Recursive salience and the Born rule structure. The strength function S is presented in this appendix in its event level form, a weighting over outcome classes defined by a fixed model MO. This local formulation is appropriate for modeling bounded meaning events. However, the general UPC framework allows for a more expansive interpretation in which salience is not a single evaluation but a recursive, continuously updating field that may influence multiple operator layers. A.5.1.1 Recursive salience. In the general case, salience may operate at several levels: pre-model salience, weighting over the potential domain PO before any model is selected; model level salience, weighting over the distinctions introduced by MO; articulative salience, modulation of the ordering function LO equals order, MO, S; recognition level salience, modulation of the likelihood that a given articulated outcome will be recognized, JO. Formally, this can be expressed as a recursive update, S_next equals F, S_current, PO, MO, LO, JO, where F is a salience update functional determined by the observer's representational commitments. This recursion does not imply temporal iteration, it reflects the fact that each UPC model is a bounded slice of a potentially unbounded meaning formation process. The present appendix adopts the event-level form of S for clarity, while section 1.3 provides the general conceptual treatment. A.5.1.2 Born waits as structural salience within the UPC, QM bridge. The Born rule appears as the quantum instantiation of the salience function, S, C_I, equals pi_I psi caret 2. This expression is not interpreted as a physical collapse mechanism. Instead, it is treated as the structural salience profile over the quantum potential domain. The Born weights specify which outcome classes are more salient, which distinctions are more likely to be articulated, which recognitions are structurally favored. This reframing dissolves the traditional puzzle surrounding the Born rule by treating it as a special case of a general salience architecture rather than a dynamical process in space-time. A.5.1.3 Model selection as collapse. Because salience determines which distinctions become operative, the choice of measurement basis or modeling frame is itself a collapse event. Before any UPC chain is formally specified, a recursive salience process has already shaped the potential domain, considered the model, adopted the distinctions, articulated the ordering of attention, the recognition landscape. Thus, the event-level placement of S in this appendix reflects the bounded scope of the phenomenon being analyzed, while the general recursive formulation is provided in section 1.3. A.6 Collapse. C. Collapse occurs when recognition is unique, C equals 1. J_O collapse is not physical. It is the structural commitment to one articulated outcome. A.6.1 Mechanical registration versus meaning collapse. UPC draws a strict distinction between mechanical registration and meaning collapse. Mechanical registration refers to physical interaction, decoherence, and apparatus dynamics. These processes occur entirely on the physical layer and do not, by themselves, produce an outcome. Meaning collapse, C, is an observer-indexed structural commitment. The moment an observer uniquely recognizes one articulated outcome class within their model, MO collapse is not a physical event. It is not produced by apparatus dynamics. It is a meaning layer operation that occurs only within the Joe rightward arrow C segment of the chain. Quantum paradoxes arise only when mechanical registration and meaning collapse are conflated. Once separated, the regress problem and the collapse location puzzle dissolve. A.7 Trace, T, a stable material record, T equals F, Ci, where F is a physical registration process, example decoherence, sound, writing, gesture. Traces are structurally determinate but semantically underdetermined. Clarification. A trace may take many material forms: writing, sound, an audio recording, a constructed tool, a building, or any other stable physical record. All such traces require an observer both to create them and to recognize them. Apparatus can produce mechanical registrations, but only because observers design them to do so, and only observers draw meaning from the data they generate. The observer is upstream in the chain. Trace also exists in the inner world of the observer, the recognition itself, the memory it forms, the imagination and creativity that allow tools to be built, and the feelings and meanings that are carried forward. A trace is therefore both a physical record and an inner, meaning-bearing record within the observer. A.8 Listening/reception, LO, maps a trace back into inner potential, LO, T, M_O, equals psi_O, listen. A.9 Repotentialization, R, the structural effect of listening, RO, T, M_O, equals psi_O, music repotentialization restores openness. A.10 Micro-articulation and micro-collapse. Embodied micro-events, A_micro, psi_O, M_body, equals E_O_microc_micro, E_O micro, M_body, equals 1. These do not produce stable traces. A.11 Consensus operator, K, aggregates articulated outcomes across observers, K equals 1/m, sigma j equals 1 caret m1 ci, j, equals C asterisk high consensus rightward arrow classical objectivity medium consensus rightward arrow contextual stability low consensus rightward arrow observer relative states A.12 logical ordering, not temporal, the operator chain, J rightward arrow A rightward arrow C rightward arrow T rightward arrow L rightward arrow R is logical, not physical. UPC does not posit a temporal collapse event. A.13 Operator magnification. Each operator in the UPC chain can be expanded into finer layers of detail. Meaning is not flat, it has depth, nuance, and internal structure. For this reason, every operator, PO, MO, S, LO, JO, C, T, and R, can be examined at different magnifications depending on the observer and the task. At a coarse magnification, the chain appears as a simple sequence. At finer magnifications, each operator reveals sub-operations, micro-articulations, attentional shifts, emotional tones, memories, contrasts, imaginings, and embodied adjustments. These layers are not additions to the chain, they are the internal structure of the operators themselves. UPC does not fix a single resolution. It provides a framework that remains coherent across all magnifications, from the simplest recognition to the most complex acts of meaning, creativity, and interpretation. Appendix B Structural parallels across domains. This appendix shows how the same operator chain appears in quantum measurement, linguistic interpretation, perceptual ambiguity, social cognition, musical expression. B.1 Collapse domains. UPC operator, quantum measurement, linguistic interpretation. Jordan sentence, perceptual ambiguity, duck, R.A. bit, social cognition, Alex left early, musical expression, perform ER/listen ER, PO, potential domain, quantum state / psi / wrangle / 2 meanings, O1, O2 2 percepts, P1, P2 3 explanation NS, E1 E2 E3 performer S inner musical potential / psi / wrangle _ P / MO, model, measurement basis / POVM grammar, context, world knowledge visual priors, familiarity, cues beliefs, norms, biases, context musical model, harmony, rhythm, phrasing. S, strength function, born rule / alpha _ I caret 2 / interpretive salience perceptual salience plausibility y weights viability of expressive meanings LO, articulate on, measurement operator selects one meaning rightward arrow articulated sentence selects one percept rightward arrow I see a duck selects one explanation and rightward arrow narrative performer shapes meaning into musical form JO, recognity on, detector click rightward arrow outcome class recognize S articulated meaning as the meaning recognize S percept as the percept recognize S. Explanation N as the explanation N performer recognizes musical meaning, listener does not collapse C, collapse, outcome becomes definite meaning becomes definite percept becomes definite explanation becomes definite performer collapses into trace, listener remains open T, trace, detector record / memory, paraphrase memory, report retelling, reasoning sounded phrase / log e, speech recording consensus classical objectivity shared meaning shared perceptual reality shared social narrative group. Interpretation, imposed meaning, B.2 explanatory notes, final version, quantum measurement collapse is the physical instantiation of the UPC chain. PO rightward arrow MO rightward arrow S rightward arrow LO rightward arrow JO rightward arrow C rightward arrow T corresponds to the standard projection postulate, with the observer S role made explicit. Linguistic interpretation ambiguous sentences present structured potential meanings. Interpretation collapses when the observer recognizes one meaning as the meaning. Perceptual ambiguity ambiguous figures, duck, rabbit, necker cube, present multiple perceptual potentials. Perception collapses to a single percept at a time. Social cognition behavior presents multiple plausible explanations. Interpretation collapses when the observer commits to one narrative. Musical expression: the performer collapses inner potential into a musical trace. The listener does not collapse their potentialize. Consensus arises only through group interpretation. Appendix C. Phenomenology worked examples note. These examples use the local, event-level form of salience. For the general recursive formulation, see section 1.3. C.1 Linguistic ambiguity sentence: they didn't invite Jordan because they're too competitive. P.O. Oh, Jordan is too competitive. O2, the inviters are too competitive. M.O. Grammar, pronoun attachment expectations, contextual knowledge. S. Salience weights, example: O equals 0.8, O2 equals 0.2, LO, selects one meaning. Rightward arrow: Jordan is too competitive. Joe, recognition of that meaning as the meaning. C. Ambiguity collapses, interpretation becomes definite. T. Memory, paraphrase, subsequent statements. Consensus, observers may converge or diverge depending on context. Result, linguistic meaning is a collapse process. C.2 Perceptual ambiguity stimulus, duck, rabbit, ambiguous figure. P.O. P. Duck, P2, rabbit. M.O. Visual priors, familiarity, recent exposure, cultural cues. S. Perceptual salience, example: P equals 0.6, P2 equals 0.4, LO, selects one percept. Rightward arrow: I see a duck. Joe, recognition of that percept as the percept. C. Percept becomes definite, alternative falls away. T. Memory, verbal report. Consensus, observers may disagree, acknowledge ambiguity, or switch. Result, perception is a collapse process. C.3 Social interpretation event: Alex left the meeting early. P.O. E. Upset. E2, another appointment. E3, unwell. M.O. Beliefs about Alex, cultural norms, context, biases. S. Plausibility weights, example: E equals 0.7, E2 equals 0.2, E3 equals 0.1, LO, selects one explanation. Rightward arrow: Alex was upset. Joe, recognition of that explanation as the explanation. C. Social meaning becomes definite. T. Memory, retelling, subsequent reasoning. Consensus, group may converge or diverge depending on information. Result, social meaning is a collapse process. C.4 Consensus and shared meaning. Consensus stabilizes meaning across observers. Consensus emerges when multiple observers collapse to the same outcome. K equals 1/m, sigma underscore j equals 1 caret m1 ci, j, equals c asterisk. High consensus, classical objectivity. Medium consensus, acknowledged ambiguity. Low consensus, observer relative meaning. Consensus stabilizes shared linguistic, perceptual, and social reality. C.5 Logical ordering interparatation follows the J. Rightward arrow A, rightward arrow C, rightward arrow T, rightward arrow L, rightward arrow R chain. The operator chain, J rightward arrow A, rightward arrow C, rightward arrow L, rightward arrow R is logical, not temporal. Recognition presupposes potential, articulation presupposes recognition, collapse presupposes articulation, observation presupposes collapse. UPC does not posit a physical collapse event in time. C.6 Observer instantiation. Observers are meaning-bearing agents. An observer is any system that instantiates the full chain: inner potential, recognition, articulation, collapse, reception, repotentialization. UPC defines an observer structurally, not biologically. For the purpose of formalization, we constrain the definition to systems that instantiate the full J, A, C, L, R chain within the UPC-QM framework. This constraint is methodological rather than metaphysical. It allows the formalism to interface cleanly with quantum mechanics, while the broader UPC architecture remains substrate neutral and not limited to mathematically expressible systems. Appendix D UPC in quantum measurement. This appendix presents the one-to-one mapping between the UPC collapse architecture and the standard components of quantum measurement. The purpose is to show that quantum measurement is a specific physical instantiation of the general UPC structure. Metanote: the UPC QM bridge presented here is a structural mapping, not a modification of physics. Apparent paradoxes arise only when mechanical registration is conflated with meaning collapse, or when observer-indexed structures are misattributed as global physical events. These are sociological and cognitive frame effects, not structural limitations of the formalism. Clarifying this distinction does not alter UPC, QM, or their mapping, it simply prevents category errors. D.1 Potential domain left right arrow quantum state PO left right arrow psi UPC, PO is the structured domain of potential outcomes. Quantum mechanics, the quantum state, psi equals sigma I alpha underscore IA underscore I is the physical potential domain. Mapping, PO left right arrow psi D.2 model left right arrow measurement basis slash POVM UPC, MO partitions the potential domain into meaningful outcome classes. Quantum mechanics, a measurement basis or POVM, M equals A underscore IA underscore I partitions the Hilbert space into outcome classes. Mapping, MO measurement basis slash POVM D.3 LO left right arrow measurement operator UPC, LO is the articulation operator that makes outcome classes available for recognition. Quantum mechanics, the measurement operator, projector or POVM element, plays the same role. LO left right arrow pi underscore I it is the physical articulation of the measurement context. D.4 Strength function left right arrow Born rule UPC, the strength function assigns viability to each potential outcome. Quantum mechanics, the Born rule assigns, S, C underscore I, equals alpha underscore I superscript 2 mapping, S left right arrow Born weights D.5 Mechanical registration left right arrow decoherence UPC, mechanical registration is the physical stabilization of a trace before meaning collapse. Quantum mechanics, decoherence stabilizes pointer states and suppresses interference. Mapping, mechanical registration decoherence this is the pre-collapse physical step. D.6 Meaning collapse left right arrow conceptual gap in QM UPC, meaning collapse is the observer-indexed recognition event JO that completes collapse. Quantum mechanics, QM has no operator corresponding to meaning collapse. This is the conceptual gap, the projection postulate gives the result, but not the recognition step. Mapping, meaning collapse conceptual gap in QM UPC fills the structural gap without altering QM. D.7 Worked example, qubit measurement in Z basis state, psi equals alpha 0 plus beta 1 PO left right arrow quantum state PO equals 0, 1 MO left right arrow Z basis M equals 0 0, 1 1 LO left right arrow projectors LO equals pi, pi strength function left right arrow Born rule S, C, equals alpha superscript 2, S, C, equals beta superscript 2 mechanical registration left right arrow decoherence the apparatus decoheres into pointer states correlated with 0 or 1. Meaning collapse left right arrow projection UPC makes explicit the recognition step, C equals 1. J underscore O this corresponds to the projection, psi rightward arrow 0 or 1 trace a detector click or classical record. Appendix E Quantum paradoxes dissolved UPC does not alter quantum mechanics. It dissolves the paradoxes by restoring the missing structural distinctions between mechanical registration and meaning collapse private outcomes and shared outcomes observer indexed states and classical traces. Each paradox below is resolved by applying the UPC mapping, PO left right arrow psi, MO left right arrow basis slash POVM, LO left right arrow measurement operator, S left right arrow Born rule, mechanical registration left right arrow decoherence, meaning collapse left right arrow J underscore OE.1 Schrodinger's cat mechanical registration is not equal to collapse. Standard paradox, the cat is said to be alive plus dead until an observer looks, creating a contradiction between microscopic superposition and macroscopic definiteness. UPC resolution, the detector and cat undergo mechanical registration, decoherence. This produces a stable pointer state long before any observer arrives. But meaning collapse, JO, occurs only when an observer recognizes the outcome. Thus, the cat is not in a semantic superposition. The paradox arises only if mechanical registration and meaning collapse are conflated. UPC separates them cleanly. E.2 Wigner's friend observer indexed collapse resolves the paradox. Standard paradox: the friend sees a definite outcome, Wigner treats the lab as a superposition. Both descriptions seem incompatible. UPC resolution: collapse is observer indexed, the friend collapses relative to their own Joe. Wigner has not yet applied Joe and therefore assigns a different state. There is no contradiction because collapse is not a global physical event. Each observer's collapse is relative to their own MO and recognition event. Thus, Wigner's and the friend's descriptions coexist without inconsistency. The paradox dissolves once collapse is not treated as an absolute physical transition. E.3 Observer relative states UPC makes explicit what relational and QBIST interpretations gesture toward: a quantum state is relative to an observer's model, MO. Collapse is relative to an observer's recognition, JO. Classical traces, T, are shared, but meaning collapse is indexed. This removes the need for a single, universal collapse event. E.4 Contextuality: contextuality arises because the measurement model, MO, determines which outcome classes exist. Different MOs carve the potential domain differently. Collapse, JO, selects from the partition defined by MO. UPC reframes contextuality as different observers, or apparatuses, instantiate different MOs, so they collapse different partitions of the same PO. This is structural, not mysterious. E.5 Collapse location problem: standard problem: where does collapse occur? In the apparatus? In the environment? In the observer's brain? At the moment of decoherence. UPC resolution: collapse is not a physical event in space-time. It is a logical operator, C equals 1. J_O. Thus, there is no location of collapse. Decoherence handles the physical stabilization. JO handles the semantic stabilization. The two are distinct and non-competing. The problem dissolves once collapse is not treated as a physical process. E.6 Definite outcomes problem: standard problem: why do we observe definite outcomes rather than superpositions? UPC resolution: because 1. Decoherence produces mechanically stable pointer states. 2. JO selects a unique outcome relative to the observer's model. 3. Collapse is the structural commitment to that outcome. Thus, definite outcomes arise from the combination of decoherence, physical, and recognition, structural. No modification of quantum mechanics is required. The mystery comes from conflating physical registration with meaning collapse. Appendix F: Music, non-collapse, and repotentialization. This appendix summarizes how the UPC-QM operator chain applies to musical experience. Music provides a domain in which collapse and non-collapse can be cleanly distinguished. Performers collapse inner potential into a musical trace. Listeners do not collapse, they potentialize. This asymmetry is structural, not psychological. F.1 Performer side collapse recognition: JO, a determinate musical meaning is recognized from the performer's inner potential, J_P, psi_P, equals M_P articulation, A, the meaning is shaped under the musical model, A_expressive, M_P, M_music, equals E_P collapse, C, performance commits the articulated form into the world, C, E_P, M_music, equals 1T_music set membership symbol W. The trace contains structure, pitch, rhythm, timbre, but not the performer's private meaning. F.2 Listener side non-collapse repotentialization, R, the listener receives the trace, LO, T_music, M_L, equals psi_L, listen. This induces a rich, open inner potential, RO, T_music, M_L, equals psi_L, music multiplicity of viable recognitions. The induced state supports many possible meanings, #M, S, J underscore L, M, psi underscore L music, 0 is large, no single meaning dominates. No collapse would require, C, A underscore expressive, J underscore L, psi underscore L music, M underscore L, M underscore L, equals 1 for pure listening, C underscore listen equals 0. F.3 Repotentialization, the listener's openness. Repotentialization is the listener's openness, emotional resonance, associative imagery, bodily sensation, memory, aesthetic intuition. The listener's state becomes more open, not more determinate. Music expands potential rather than collapsing it. F.4 Micro-collapse, embodied micro-events. Human embodiment continuously materializes inner potential through breath, posture, micro-movements, subtle physiological changes. These are modeled as A underscore micro, psi underscore O, M underscore body, equals E underscore O micro, C underscore micro, E underscore O micro, M underscore body, equals 1. But these micro collapses do not produce a stable trace T set membership symbol W. They remain below the threshold of determinate expression. F.5 Group interpretation, imposed meaning, not intrinsic meaning. Each listener receives the trace, low underscore I, T underscore music, M underscore O underscore I, equals psi underscore O underscore I music. A group interpretation is a secondary mapping, G, T underscore music, M underscore O underscore I, equals mu underscore group. This meaning is imposed, contingent, historical, and not extracted from the trace, G, T underscore music. Is not equal to F underscore sem, T underscore music. Group interpretation stabilizes social meaning, not intrinsic meaning. F.6 Consciousness phases map to the UPC chain. The phenomenological phases of musical experience map directly onto the UPC chain. Pre-recognition, psi set membership symbol P, no J. Applied recognition, J, psi, equals M. Articulation, A underscore expressive, M, M, equals E. Collapse, C, E, M, equals 1. T. Reception, LO, T, M, equals psi, listen. Repotentialization, RO, T, M, equals psi, music. These phases are not outside the UPCQM formalism, they are trajectories through the same operator pipeline. F.7 Worked example, musical phrase. A performer feels an emerging musical impulse, psi underscore P set membership symbol P underscore P recognition. A rising 3-note motif is recognized, J underscore P, psi underscore P, equals M underscore P articulation. The performer shapes, pitches, rhythm, phrasing, dynamics. A underscore expressive, M underscore P, M underscore music, equals E underscore P collapse. The phrase is played, C, E underscore P, M underscore music, equals 1. T underscore phrase listener reception. The listener receives, LO, T underscore phrase, M underscore L, equals psi underscore L, listen. Repotentialization. The phrase opens a new inner potential, RO. T underscore phrase, M underscore L, equals psi underscore L, music. No collapse. The listener remains in a state of openness unless they choose to articulate. Appendix G. Case studies across domains: scientific interpretation, materialist collapse, hard drive observer fallacy, linguistic misalignment, music as medium, consensus domain identity, fused worldviews. Each demonstrates observer indexed collapse and the stolen objectivity error. Appendix H. Boundary conditions. What UPC does not claim. UPC does not modify QM. UPC does not propose physical collapse. UPC does not require consciousness. UPC does not introduce hidden variables. UPC does not branch worlds. UPC does not claim absolute outcomes. UPC does provide the missing structural layer. UPC does not treat artificial systems, computational models, or physical devices as observers. They perform mechanical registration, not collapse. Any meaning attributed to their outputs is collapsed by a human observer interpreting them. This prevents the hard drive observer fallacy and clarifies that AI systems do not generate meaning, they generate potential that a human collapses. List of paradoxes and interpretive errors clarified by UPC Quantum Mechanics 1. Schrödinger's cat conflation of mechanical registration with collapse 2. Wigner's friend assumption of global collapse 3. Observer relative states assumption of a single absolute quantum state 4. Contextuality assumption that outcomes exist independently of measurement context 5. Collapse location problem treating collapse as a physical event in space-time 6. Definite outcomes problem confusion about why outcomes appear definite scientific interpretation 7. Model object confusion treating models as literal descriptions of reality 8. Theory latentness of observation assuming observations are neutral 9. Materialist collapse. Fallacy equating neural firing with collapse 10. Hard drive observer fallacy treating storage devices as observers linguistic and cognitive 11. Ambiguity collapse assuming sentences have intrinsic meaning 12. Miscommunication paradox assuming disagreement implies error 13. Stolen objectivity error, linguistic form, treating one's interpretation as intrinsic perceptual and phenomenological 14. Perceptual objectivity assumption assuming perception reveals intrinsic properties 15. Multistable perception assuming ambiguous stimuli are one thing 16. Social interpretation errors assuming motives or intentions are intrinsic music and aesthetics 17. Intrinsic meaning fallacy, music, assuming music contains its meaning 18. Group interpretation fallacy treating cultural meaning as intrinsic 19. Listener side collapse error assuming listeners collapse meaning identity, culture, and worldviews 20. Identity fused objectivity treating one's worldview as the objective 121. Narrative absolutism assuming narratives are discovered, not constructed 22. Cross-domain objectivity error assuming objectivity transfers across domains meta-level philosophical 23. Where is meaning? Problem searching for meaning in objects 24. Who collapses? Problem assuming collapse requires consciousness or biology 25. What is an observer? Problem treating observers as physical devices unifying structural error 26. The stolen objectivity error, general form, mistaking one's observer indexed collapse for intrinsic meaning why the UPC formalism is structurally unavoidable UPC does not introduce new mathematics. It reorganizes existing, accepted structures from quantum mechanics and phenomenology into a single operator chain, PO rightward arrow MO rightward arrow LO rightward arrow JO rightward arrow C rightward arrow T. Because this chain is already implicit in the von Neumann, Dirac measurement formalism, any attempt to reject UPC requires rejecting one of the foundational components of quantum theory itself. Below is the structural constraint that follows directly from the formalism. I.1 The 3 points of rejection, and why each fails. 1. Denying the potential domain, PO. To reject PO, one must deny that systems exist in superposition or that probability amplitudes represent real potentialities. This would require discarding the wave function Hilbert space. The superposition principle interference phenomena. Rejecting PO is equivalent to rejecting the foundations of quantum mechanics. 2. Denying collapse, C. To reject collapse, one must deny that measurement produces definite outcomes. This contradicts every laboratory measurement, every detector click, every classical record, the Born rule, the projection postulate. Rejecting collapse is equivalent to rejecting empirical physics. 3. Denying the observer, JO. To reject JO, one must claim that outcomes become definite without any observer-indexed recognition, that is, without a meaning-bearing agent performing collapse. This creates the measurement problem in its original form. When does collapse occur? What counts as a measurement? Why do we observe definite outcomes at all? Removing the observer collapses the interpretive structure of QM. I point to why the formalism is clean. UPC is not an alternative physics. It is a structural tautology. For an outcome to be definite, something must select it, and something must recognize that selection. This is true in physics, perception, language, social meaning, music, identity, cognition, because the same observer performs the collapse in all domains. If the chain is valid in physics, it is valid everywhere the same observer operates. I.3 Why the formalism is unavoidable. A critic cannot say, The operator chain is correct for electrons, but incorrect for sentences or musical phrases. The chain describes the observer S structure E, not the object S. If the observer collapses quantum potentials using P O rightward arrow M O rightward arrow L O rightward arrow J rightward arrow C rightward arrow T, then the same observer collapses. Perceptual potentials detector outputs linguistic potentials social potentials narrative potentials using the same structural sequence. To deny this is to claim that the observer uses two different logics depending on the domain, a claim that is incoherent. I.4 The structural constraint, the trap, UPC creates a simple but powerful constraint. If one accepts the formalism of quantum measurement, one must accept the formalism of UPC. Rejecting UPC requires rejecting the wave function, the Born rule, the projection postulate, the observer's role in measurement. In other words, rejecting UPC requires rejecting or reinterpreting core elements of quantum mechanics. This is not rhetorical. It is a direct consequence of the shared operator structure. I.5 Shared consensus as statistical objectivity. UPC reframes objectivity as objectivity equals stable consensus across observers collapses. This is not relativism, not subjectivism, not metaphysics, it is statistical stability. Many observers using similar models collapsing similar potentials producing similar traces. This is the only form of objectivity compatible with quantum mechanics, phenomenology, cognitive science, social interpretation. It replaces the outdated subjective versus objective binary with a more stable, structurally grounded account of truth. Appendix J The structural basis of meaning, why life cannot be meaningless under UPC. UPC formalizes meaning as a structural operator within the collapse sequence, P O rightward arrow M O rightward arrow L O rightward arrow J rightward arrow C rightward arrow T. Meaning is not an interpretation layered onto experience. Meaning is the transition from potential to definiteness. This has several consequences. J.1 Meaning is the collapse operator, the recognition operator. J is the moment where potential becomes actual, ambiguity becomes definite, experience becomes real, a trace is formed. This transition is meaning. Meaning is not added to life. Meaning is the mechanism by which life becomes lived. J.2 Meaninglessness is a structural breakdown, not a truth. When people report meaninglessness, UPC identifies this as an overloaded potential domain, an unstable model, a disrupted ordering, a fatigued recognition operator, a collapse that cannot stabilize, a trace that cannot integrate. Meaninglessness is not a property of life. It is a state of the operator chain. It is structurally reversible. J.3 Meaning is not subjective or objective, it is structural. Meaning is not intrinsic to objects imposed by subjects, culturally constructed, metaphysically granted. Meaning is the collapse condition. J rightward arrow C. This is the same structure that produces quantum outcomes, perceptual objects, linguistic interpretation, social meaning, identity, narrative, memory. Meaning is the architecture of experience. J.4 Life cannot be meaningless under UPC because experience requires collapse, collapse requires recognition, recognition is meaning. Therefore, if experience is occurring, meaning is occurring. If meaning is occurring, life is meaningful. This is not a philosophical claim. It is a structural consequence of the operator chain. J.5 Meaning is the foundation of value because meaning is the mechanism by which events become real, identity stabilizes, memory forms, action becomes possible, relationships acquire significance. Meaning is the basis of value, purpose, agency, coherence, continuity. These are not metaphysical properties. They are structural outputs of collapse. J.6 UPC restores meaning without metaphysics. UPC does not claim cosmic purpose, intrinsic teleology, metaphysical destiny. These are not excluded, they simply lie outside the formal scope of the UPC, QM bridge. UPC remains within this structural boundary so that its claims remain rigorous and reproducible. UPC claims, meaning is the structural process by which potential becomes experience. Therefore, life is meaningful because meaning is how life operates. This is the first formal justification for meaning that does not rely on religion, existentialism, narrative, culture, metaphysics. Meaning is structural. By keeping its claims within the formal operator chain, UPC removes the artificial hierarchy in which some had once placed physics above philosophy. It gives philosophy the same structural footing and precision previously reserved for quantum mechanics, allowing philosophical inquiry into purpose, value, and teleology to proceed with clarity rather than contradiction. References: Escogido Gutierrez, E. 2026. Objectivity as High Consensus Collapse, a Structural Expansion of the Universal Principle of Collapse, UPC. Phil Papers. https://philpapers.org/rec/escoa Gutierrez, E. 2026. The UPC, Quantum Bridge, a clear structural resolution of the measurement problem. Phil Papers. https://philpapers.org/rec/escogido Gutierrez, E. 2026. The Universal Principle of Collapse, UPC. Extending collapse from quantum measurement to human meaning. Phil Papers. https://philpapers.org/rec/escchup5 Gutierrez, E. 2026. From Musical Experience to Quantum Structure E. Formalizing the Universal Principle of Collapse Across Domains. Phil Papers. https://philpapers.org/rec/escchup Gutierrez, E. 2025. A Structural Repair of Quantum Measurement, Formalizing the Observer with UPC Operators. Phil Papers. https://philpapers.org/rec/escasra Phenomenology and Consciousness, Core Foundations, Husserl, E. 1983. Ideas Pertaining to a Pure Phenomenology and to a Phenomenological Philosophy, F. Kirsten, Transaction. Springer. Original work published 1913, Merleau-Ponty, M. 2012. Phenomenology of Perception, D. A. Londas, Transaction. Routledge. Original work published 1945, Heidegger, M. 1962. Being and Time, J. McQuarrie and E. Robinson, Transaction. Harper and Row. Original work published 1927, Gallagher, S., and Zahavi, D. 2012. The Phenomenological Mind, 2nd ed. Routledge. Varela, F. J., Thompson, E., and Ross, E. 1991. The Embodied Mind, Cognitive Science and Human Experience. MIT Press. Cognitive Science, Perception and Recognition Clark, A. 2016. Surfing Uncertainty, Prediction, Action, and the Embodied Mind. Oxford University Press. Friston, K. 2010. The Free Energy Principle, A Unified Brain Theory? Nature Reviews Neuroscience, 11, 2, 127-138. Hawaii, J. 2013. The Predictive Mind. Oxford University Press. Gibson, J.J., 1979. The Ecological Approach to Visual Perception. Houghton Mifflin. Quantum Foundations, Structural Parallels, Bell, J.S., 2004. Speakable and Unspeakable in Quantum Mechanics, 2nd ed. Cambridge University Press. Boer, N. 1958. Atomic Physics and Human Knowledge. Wiley. Everett, H. 1957. Relative State Formulation of Quantum Mechanics. Reviews of Modern Physics, 29, 3, 454-462. Von Neumann, J. 1955. Mathematical Foundations of Quantum Mechanics, R. T. Bayer, Transaction. Princeton University Press. Original work published 1932, Zurich, W. H., 2003. Decoherence, Ein's Election, and the Quantum Origins of the Classical. Reviews of Modern Physics, 75, 3, 715 to 775. Wheeler, J. A., 1983. Law Without Law. In J. A. Wheeler and W. H. Zurek, eds, Quantum Theory and Measurement, pages 182 to 213. Princeton University Press. Language, Meaning, and Semiotics Austin, J. L., 1962. How to Do Things with Words. Harvard University Press. Peirce, C.S., 1931 to 1958. Collected Papers of Charles Sanders Peirce, C. Hartshorne, P. Weiss, and A. Burks, eds. Harvard University Press. Searle, J.R., 1969. Speech Acts, an Essay in the Philosophy of Language. Cambridge University Press. Wittgenstein, L., 1953. Philosophical Investigations, Gem Anscombe, Transaction. Blackwell. Systems, Information, and Structure Bateson, G., 1972. Steps to an Ecology of Mind. University of Chicago Press. Luhmann, N., 1995. Social Systems, J. Bednarz Jr. and D. Beaker, Transaction. Stanford University Press. Shannon, C.E., 1948. A Mathematical Theory of Communication. Bell System Technical Journal, 27, 379 to 423.